The tea he handed me was cold. Not lukewarm, cold. No sugar, no warmth, not even a glance. "Dad," he said flatly, "you can't stay here anymore." I looked around the living room I'd helped pay for, the ticking clock, the crooked family photo, my worn slippers by the door. I'd built this life brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. But in that moment, I wasn't a father. I wasn't even a man. I was just a living corpse they wanted out. And I left, but not for long. When I was 28, I worked 2 jobs and slept in my car during lunch breaks. Back then, I didn't have much, just a toolbox, a steel lunch pail, and a photo of my wife and newborn son folded into my wallet. I wasn't bitter about the struggle. No, I wore it like armor. I believed that if I worked hard enough, I could buy my family a life where they would never have to know the taste of desperation. And I did. My name is Elijah. I'm 68 years old now. But there was a time when I was strong, quick on my feet, and full of hope. I started as a janitor at the post office by day, and at night I scrubbed dishes at a greasy little diner that didn't even have a clock on the wall. For years, I chased overtime like a hunter stalks deer, quiet, focused, patient. I never said no to extra hours. Not once. When my son, Marcus, turned 12, I put away enough money to buy a modest house in his name. Not a mansion. Just a 2-bedroom fixer-upper with chipped paint and pipes that groaned in winter. But it was ours. I painted the walls myself, sky blue in his room because he loved superheroes. I remember his little feet dangling off the ladder, asking, "Dad, when can we have a basketball hoop out front?" I told him, "Soon, son. Real soon." The years passed, and I paid off that mortgage slowly. 27 years of steady payments. Even after my wife died, God rest her soul, I kept going. Not for me. For Marcus. Everything was always for Marcus. He went off to college, then came back with new clothes, new words, and a girlfriend who looked me up and down like I was a stray dog. I didn't say much. I figured young people change. They grow. Maybe she just needed time. When Marcus got a promotion at his job, he said he wanted to renovate the house, make it more modern. I was thrilled. I even offered to help pay for the upgrades. I didn't want any thanks, I just wanted to see my son succeed. So I dipped into the last of my retirement fund. Gave it all to him. No paperwork. No questions. Just trust. We built a second floor. Got new appliances. Even put in that basketball hoop I'd promised him 30 years before. By now, I had moved into the guest room. Smaller, no windows, but it didn't bother me. I had my books, my tea, my memories. I told myself, this is what it means to be a father, quiet pride in the shadows. But somewhere between the drywall and the new paint, my place in that home began to fade. Marcus stopped asking for my advice. He stopped introducing me to his friends. Sometimes he wouldn't even say goodnight. I became background noise in a house I helped build. There was a day, I'll never forget it, when I tried to share a story from my youth over dinner. His wife cut me off. "Elijah, not tonight, please. We've heard this one." Marcus didn't say a word. Just kept eating. That silence said everything. Still, I held on. Maybe I was clinging to the man I used to be, a provider, a protector, a father with worth. But deep down, a seed of unease had begun to sprout. Something was changing, and it wasn't just the house. It was them. And it was me. Aging quietly in a room where my voice no longer mattered. And even then, I didn't see the betrayal coming. Not yet. But I would. Very soon that IT began with a smile, one of those tight, polite ones that doesn't quite reach the eyes. Marcus called me into the kitchen one Sunday morning. Sunlight streamed in through the blinds, but the warmth didn't touch the room. His wife was already sitting there, sipping coffee like she'd been waiting for a verdict to be read. "Dad," Marcus started, "we've been going over the bills, and we think it'd be easier if I managed your finances from now on." I blinked. "My finances?" "Yeah. Just the basics, pension deposits, your account stuff. You're getting older, and, well, this way nothing slips through the cracks." I stared at him. Not because I didn't understand, but because I understood too well. I'd never missed a payment in my life. I balanced ledgers before he knew how to hold a crayon. And now, suddenly, I wasn't capable. Still, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to argue, but another part, the tired one, whispered, "Just let it go." I didn't want to create friction. So I nodded, slow and quiet. "All right. If it helps the household." That's the moment they knew they had me. It started small. They canceled my phone line to save money. My newspaper subscription vanished. Even my tea, my own tin of loose-leaf Assam, was replaced with generic bags I didn't recognize. I didn't complain. I told myself, this is how it is now. You live with your children, you adjust. But the real blow came 2 weeks later. I had gone to the bank to update my passbook. I still liked seeing the numbers printed on paper. It gave me a sense of control. When the clerk looked at me and said, "There's been a change of access on your account, sir," I felt my stomach drop. "What change?" I asked, my voice suddenly dry. "Your son, Marcus, he's the sole authorized user now." I left that bank with my hands trembling and my chest hollow. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I waited. I observed. I noticed how every bill came to him now, how even my mail had started being opened before I saw it. The final nail came one rainy Thursday. I walked home from the corner store and found the locks changed. I thought maybe I was at the wrong door. But no, same doormat, same dying potted plant I kept trying to revive. When Marcus finally came to the door, he didn't even look surprised. Yeah, about that. We had the locks redone. It's for security." I asked, "Security from who?" "Me?" He shrugged. "It's just easier this way. We didn't think you'd be out long." Didn't think. Didn't ask. That night, I slept in my old car, parked just 2 blocks from the home I helped pay for. The same home where I used to tuck Marcus into bed, kiss his forehead, and whisper dreams into the night air. The betrayal didn't roar in like a storm. It arrived gently, like a slow leak under the floorboards. But by the time I realized, the rot had already spread. I used to think that sacrifice was its own reward. That if I gave everything, I would always have a place. But I was wrong. Tell me, have you ever trusted someone so deeply, only to realize they were slowly pushing you out, piece by piece? Let me know in the comments. You're not alone. And neither was I. Not for long. The morning after sleeping in my car, I came back, not to argue, but to pretend everything was normal. That's what old men do sometimes. We tell ourselves it was all a misunderstanding, that if we just sit at the kitchen table with our usual cup of tea, the world will right itself again. But no one made me tea that morning. No one even looked up when I walked in. Marcus was reading the news on his tablet, legs crossed, wearing the slippers I gave him last Father's Day. His wife passed behind me with a laundry basket, her perfume sharp and cold. Neither said good morning. I sat. Waited. My hands felt out of place on the table. I tried to speak. "You changed the locks without telling me." Marcus didn't look up. "Yeah, I told you." "Security." "Security from who?" He sighed, finally setting down the tablet. "Dad, don't do this." I wanted to scream, "I built this house." But I didn't. My pride swallowed the words. Later that week, I received a notice in the mail, forwarded to me by a kind neighbor who still remembered I lived there. The letter was from the county office. It was a property reassessment form. Under owner of record, only one name was listed, Marcus D. Walker. Not mine. Not even a mention. I read the document twice, then a third time, hoping for a correction. But no. There it was, black ink on white paper. I no longer existed. It felt like a death certificate. Only I was still breathing. I went to my file cabinet, an old metal one I kept since the 80s, and pulled out the original paperwork. The deed. The mortgage stubs. I found the signed letter from the bank when the final payment was made, back in 2003. It all bore my name. But somewhere, somehow, things had shifted. Ownership had passed behind my back, likely during the renovation, when I'd blindly signed a few forms Marcus gave me. I never imagined my own son would hide such a thing from me. I'd lived in that house for over 30 years. I'd bled in its kitchen when I sliced my hand fixing a pipe. I'd wept in its hallway the night my wife died. And now, legally, I was a ghost in its walls. I began to notice smaller things. The thermostat was set freezing cold, even though they knew my joints ached in the cold. Photos of me began to vanish from the hallway. Family dinners happened behind closed doors. My chair by the window was moved into the garage. One day, Marcus's wife said, without even looking at me, "You know, Elijah, maybe it's time you thought about a retirement home. Somewhere with people your age." I didn't respond. Not then. But her words echoed like a bell in my head for days, somewhere with people your age. Like I was no longer family. Just a relic taking up space. I watched them live their lives around me, as if I were a shadow on the wall, unnoticed unless I stepped into their light. It was then that I understood. I hadn't just lost a room in the house. I had lost my place in their lives. And the man I used to be, the one who held everything together, was dying in plain sight. But even in death, paper lies. And I still had the truth. I just hadn't used it yet. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind where the house should have smelled like roast chicken and sounded like laughter echoing through open windows. Instead, the only thing that filled the air was silence, thick, brittle, unnatural. I had just finished folding my sweaters, neatly, the way my wife used to, and stepped out of the guest room when I heard it. "I don't want him here anymore," Marcus's wife whispered sharply from the hallway. Her voice traveled through the vents like poison. "He's always watching. It's uncomfortable." "I know," Marcus replied, barely trying to hush his tone. "But what do you want me to do? Just throw him out?" "Why not?" she snapped. "He doesn't pay rent. He doesn't do anything. He's just there. Like a piece of old furniture we're too guilty to toss." Old furniture. That phrase settled in my chest like wet cement. I stood frozen, my fingers still clutching the edge of a folded sweater. I thought back to when Marcus broke his arm at age 9 and I carried him through the rain in my work boots, soaking wet, slipping on the porch steps. I remembered missing his graduation because I was stuck in overtime, paying off the second bathroom remodel, because he said he was embarrassed to invite friends over with just one. I remembered every sacrifice like a tattoo on my bones. But none of that mattered now. To them, I wasn't a father. I was clutter. That evening, they hosted a dinner party. Friends and neighbors filled the house I built, laughing over drinks and music. I wasn't invited. No one even mentioned it. I sat alone in the dark guest room with a paperback in my lap, unread. But I heard everything, every joke, every toast, every time someone asked, "Hey, where's your dad?" And Marcus responded, "Oh, he's around somewhere." Around. Like a stray cat. A lingering shadow. After the guests left and the house quieted, I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water. Marcus was there, wiping down the counter. "Why didn't you tell me about the dinner?" I asked. He didn't even look up. "We figured you'd want to rest." Rest. At that moment, I realized I had become invisible by design. They didn't forget me. They excluded me. I nodded. "I see." That night, I opened my suitcase. It had been tucked away in the back of the closet for months. I packed with the same hands that once cradled Marcus as a baby, now older, slower, but still steady. 3 shirts. A coat. My shaving kit. A photo of my late wife. And my file folder. The one that held every piece of paper that proved who I was, and what I had built. I didn't say goodbye. There was no point. I left just after midnight. The street was quiet. The porch light was off. No one noticed. I moved into a small room above a hardware store, one of those places that still smells like sawdust and old rubber. The owner, Tom, was kind enough to rent it out cheap. No questions. Just keys and a nod. That first night away, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat at the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the cracked mirror. Was I still a father? Or just a ghost in someone else's success story? The next morning, I went to the county records office with my folder. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, answers, maybe. Or a confirmation that I hadn't imagined my life. What I found, instead, was something unexpected. A tiny oversight. A sliver of truth buried in bureaucracy. And that truth was this. The house wasn't legally transferred. The title was never properly signed over. On paper, real paper, I was still the rightful owner. They hadn't erased me. Not yet. And that was the final nail. But not in my coffin. In theirs. I kept that folder close, like a shield and a weapon rolled into one. Each night in that small rented room, I'd sit by the narrow window with a lamp buzzing faintly above me, the papers spread across the bed like old war maps. Deed copies. Bank records. Signed checks. The mortgage clearance letter. My name was etched into every page. They thought I was gone. Forgotten. A ghost with no home, no spine, no fight left in him. But ghosts remember. And this one had a plan. The first thing I did was call Mr. Jennings, my old friend and former co-worker from the post office. He had gone into private legal consulting years ago, mostly small estate matters. When I told him everything, he paused. "Elijah, you're still the legal owner of that house." I nodded, my voice steady. "I know. But I want it in writing." He helped me draft a formal declaration of ownership, complete with notarized copies of every relevant document. Then we submitted a request for a title review. Jennings handled the paperwork. I just signed, with the same steady hand that once signed off on every one of Marcus's school permission slips. As the process rolled forward, I couldn't help but think of all the nights I'd sat in that house, my house, listening to the ticking clock, the arguments, the silence that grew heavier with each passing year. I'd once thought silence was peace. But now I knew better. Silence was what they fed me while they erased me. And now I had no intention of staying quiet. In the evenings, I'd take long walks past the old neighborhood. I never walked directly by the house, not yet. I just passed 2 blocks away, watching the lights in the distance, knowing they still slept under the roof I built. I'd think about the old days. The smell of pancakes on Saturdays. Marcus playing in the sprinklers. My wife hanging laundry on the line, humming softly. All of that lived inside those walls. Not just in memory, but in foundation. That house wasn't just real estate. It was me. One night, I found myself standing in front of it after all. I don't know how my feet brought me there, but there I was, across the street, watching from the shadows. A porch light flickered on. Marcus came out, took the trash to the curb, then went back inside without so much as glancing around. The door shut behind him like a gavel. He had no idea what was coming. By the third week, the title confirmation arrived. It was official, I was still the sole legal owner. Whatever Marcus had tried to pull with those renovation documents never made it through final processing. Probably too lazy to file it properly. Probably assumed the world would always hand him what I had bled for. But the world isn't that kind. Not when ghosts carry proof. I met with Jennings again, this time to initiate formal eviction papers. It felt surreal, having to evict my own son, but it wasn't about vengeance. It was about restoration. About reclaiming the dignity they stripped from me, one whisper, one cold dinner, one lock change at a time. I didn't announce anything. Didn't call. Didn't send a warning text. I let the system speak for me. The notice was served on a Tuesday morning. And I heard, through an old neighbor who still spoke to me, that Marcus had erupted when he saw it. Shouting. Raging. Denial followed by confusion, then panic. I imagined his face when he realized he'd forgotten the one thing that mattered, the truth. A ghost with nothing left is dangerous. But a ghost with proof? That's something far worse. That's a father with a plan. And my next step would be the beginning of their reckoning. The day after the notice was served, I went back, for the first time in nearly 2 months. Not as a guest. Not as a father hoping for a seat at the table. But as the owner. I didn't knock. I simply walked up the driveway like I used to, boots hitting the concrete with the same rhythm they had for 30 years. The same cracks I once patched. The same roses I planted now wilting in neglect. Marcus opened the door, and for a moment, his face couldn't decide what emotion to wear. First came disbelief, then anger, and then, just for a flicker, fear. "What are you doing here?" he asked, voice tight. I didn't raise mine. "I'm home." He stepped out, trying to block the doorway. "You can't just." "I can," I said, holding up the stamped envelope. "And I have." His wife appeared behind him, arms crossed, her expression a mix of disgust and disbelief. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The look on her face screamed louder than words ever could. Marcus grabbed the envelope and flipped through the documents. His hands trembled. "You tricked me," he said, voice cracking. "No," I replied. "You tricked yourself. You assumed I'd just vanish quietly. That I'd go die in some lonely corner and leave you the spoils." I stepped past him, slow, steady, my eyes scanning the house. They'd repainted the living room. The clock was gone. My slippers, too. The air smelled like some artificial cinnamon spray instead of the morning coffee and dust it used to carry. Everything was different. And yet, nothing had changed. I walked to the hallway. The photo wall had been redone. My face had been erased. But I was still there, just not in the way they wanted. I turned to Marcus and said, "You were a boy when I gave you everything. And you stayed a boy when you took more than I ever offered. You're kicking us out," his wife finally spoke, her voice sharp. I didn't flinch. "No. The law is." They had 30 days. That's what the letter said. But it wasn't about the legalities anymore. It was about what those papers represented. The truth. The history. The foundation beneath their feet. Each day after that, I passed by the house. Sometimes I stood across the street. Other times, I simply parked nearby and watched from a distance. I didn't speak. I didn't show anger. I just existed. And in that quiet haunting, they unraveled. I saw Marcus one day, sitting alone on the porch, head in his hands. The same porch where I once sat reading the paper, waiting for him to come home from school. Now, he sat waiting for time to rewind. But time doesn't move backward. It only echoes. And every step I took reminded him of what he lost, not just the house, but the man who once would have done anything for him. He had buried me with silence. Now, I was haunting him with presence. But this haunting wasn't meant to destroy. It was meant to awaken. To remind. To shake loose the false comfort that betrayal buys. Because I wasn't the one who was disposable. I was the foundation. And foundations don't disappear. They crack. They rumble. And sometimes, they return. Tell me in the comments, if your own child turned you into a stranger in your own home, would you confront them, or would you walk away and never look back? I chose to confront. But I wasn't finished yet. The reckoning had just begun. It was the 23rd day after the eviction notice when the first real crack appeared, not in the walls of the house, but in Marcus's voice. He called me. Not to apologize. Not to ask forgiveness. But to negotiate. "Dad," he began, his tone stiff and forced, "we've been thinking, maybe we rushed things. Maybe we can work something out." I stayed silent for a moment, letting his words echo in their own emptiness. I could hear the desperation just beneath the surface, like a man clinging to a raft he never thought he'd need. "I'm listening," I finally said, even though I wasn't. He hesitated. "Maybe we could, I don't know, co-own the house. You stay in the guest room, we set up some boundaries, mutual respect." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was insulting. Mutual respect? Where was that when I ate cold leftovers while they dined like royalty? Where was it when they threw away my teacups, saying they were too old and chipped? Where was it when they discussed retirement homes with more enthusiasm than birthday plans? "I'm not coming back to the guest room," I said calmly. "I'm not coming back to a house where I was erased like a stain on the carpet." His voice cracked. "So that's it? You're just going to throw us out?" "No, Marcus," I said, quieter now. "You threw me out. I'm just finishing the story you started." There was a long silence. He hung up. But that call told me everything. The power had shifted. He finally understood, I wasn't weak. I wasn't gone. I wasn't the quiet old man shuffling around corners anymore. I was the owner. I returned to the house again, this time not to haunt, but to walk the halls with full clarity. I brought a notepad and began making a list of repairs: scratched floorboards, a leaky faucet, a broken latch on the window in my old bedroom. Marcus came down the stairs, his face pale, watching me like I was a stranger in his dream. "You really plan on living here?" he asked. I didn't look up. I never stopped. He didn't have a response. And for the first time, I saw it, not just guilt, but regret. Regret for how easily he let go of the man who once would have taken a bullet for him. I walked past him and into the living room. The rug was different, the photos were gone, but the light that came in through the blind still painted stripes across the floor the same way it did 30 years ago. I sat in my chair. The one they had shoved into the garage. And I felt something I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. Stillness. Not loneliness. Not anger. Just stillness. The truth had finally cracked through the paint of every lie they told themselves, that I was too old to matter, too quiet to notice, too kind to fight back. And now, they were the ones displaced, disoriented, trying to find a grip in a house no longer theirs. But the saddest part? They could have had everything. All they had to do was treat me like family. But they chose pride. And now they would have to live with the silence I once endured. Except this time, it would echo louder for them. Because now, it was their turn to wonder what they'd lost. I didn't announce the day I was moving back in. No ceremony. No drama. Just me, a small moving van, and the key I never stopped carrying. The house was quiet when I arrived. Their car was still in the driveway, but no one came out. I walked up the porch steps, those same boards I once hammered in place, and unlocked the door. The air inside was still. The smell of air freshener clung to the walls, but beneath it, I could still detect traces of old wood, dust, and home. My home. Boxes filled the hallway. Marcus and his wife were packing. Slowly, angrily. She barely looked at me. Marcus did, though. Really? He asked, arms folded, eyes tired. You're just moving back in like nothing happened? No, I said, placing my coat on the hook by the door. I'm moving back in like everything happened. Because it did. He looked like he wanted to say more, but the words wouldn't come. That's the thing about guilt, it chokes harder than anger. He turned away. I went into the kitchen. The cabinet where I used to keep my tea had been filled with protein shakes and diet snacks. I cleared one shelf. Made space again. Set my old tin of loose-leaf Assam on it, right where it used to be. Then I boiled a kettle. The sound of it whistling was the first real song in that house in months. As the days passed, they packed faster. I didn't speak unless spoken to. I didn't raise my voice. I just existed, quiet and calm, like a tree reclaiming the soil from which it had been ripped. On their last night in the house, I found a note left on the kitchen table. It was from Marcus. I'm sorry for how things ended. I didn't think you'd fight back. Maybe that's what scared me the most. I forgot who you were. Maybe I never really knew. I stared at those lines for a long while. Not because they healed anything. But because they proved something. He knew. He knew what he had done. And he knew I had taken back more than a house, I had reclaimed myself. The next morning, the moving truck pulled away. I stood at the window, not out of triumph, but reflection. It wasn't joy I felt. It wasn't revenge. It was stillness again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was full of memory. I walked through the room slowly, touching the walls, opening old drawers, straightening the frame of the family photo I'd pulled from storage. I placed it back on the hallway wall. My face returned to the home it helped build. In the garage, I found my chair, still covered with a sheet. I brought it back into the living room, set it by the window, and sat down with my tea. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. Inside, everything was mine again, not because of a legal document, but because I had stood up. I had remembered my worth. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I simply reminded them, you can't bury a man who's already built the ground beneath your feet. Subscribe if you believe dignity isn't something you ever owe. It's something you protect, even when it costs you everything. Let the world take what it wants. Let them strip your titles, your chair, your name off the mailbox. But don't let them take you. And if they try, you come back. Quietly. Steadily. Completely. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive with thunder. Sometimes it walks through the front door, sets down a tea tin, and sits in silence. Knowing it belongs. Every evening now, I light the same old lamp and place it by the window, the one that overlooks the street where I once taught Marcus how to ride a bicycle, and where I used to wave goodbye to my wife every morning before heading off to work. That lamp sat in our living room for over 30 years. It had been boxed away, left to gather dust in the garage during their time here. But now, it's back where it belongs. And every night, it glows softly like a heartbeat, steady and warm. Some nights, I sit in my chair with my tea and watch the shadows stretch across the floor. Other nights, I don't watch anything at all. I just sit. And remember. I remember what it was like to hold my son's hand for the first time. To carry him on my shoulders through the rain. To wipe tears off his face when he was too little to speak and too proud to cry. I remember the way my wife used to sing to herself while folding laundry, the scent of her perfume drifting down the hallway. I remember birthdays, scraped knees, report cards, midnight fevers. I remember giving everything I had, money, strength, time, dreams, without asking for a single thing in return except respect. And when that was taken from me, I found a silence so deep, it almost consumed me. But I didn't let it. I came back. Not because I needed a house. Because I needed to remember who I was before the world tried to convince me I didn't matter anymore. This house, it's not just wood and nails. It's the archive of my life. Every scuff mark on the floor, every paint stroke on the wall, every nail I drove in with aching hands, they tell my story. And now, I live here alone. Not in sadness. In peace. Marcus hasn't called since the move. His wife never looked back. I hear the grandkids are doing well. Maybe one day they'll ask questions about the man who disappeared from the photos and then quietly returned. Maybe one day, they'll want to know the truth, not what they were told, but what really happened. If they come, I'll open the door. I'll sit them down, pour them some tea, and tell them everything. Not out of bitterness, but out of love. Because that's what this has always been about. Love that endured. Love that was betrayed. Love that never vanished, even when the world tried to bury it beneath shame and silence. There's a beauty in stillness when you've earned it. Not the stillness of being forgotten, but the stillness of having nothing left to prove. I no longer chase validation. I don't need gratitude or grand apologies. All I ever needed was to be seen. To be valued. To be remembered. Now, I sit in this house, not as a guest, not as a burden, but as its soul. And every night, before I turn in, I make sure the lamp is lit and placed by the window. Not for me. For anyone walking by. For any man who's ever felt invisible in his own home. For any father who's been told he no longer matters. That light says, I'm still here. I still matter. And I will not be erased. Not from memory. Not from history. Not from my own life. This house is quiet now, but it is full. Full of truth. Full of dignity. Full of the man I used to be, and the man I never stopped being. The last light in the window will stay on. For as long as I have breath. For as long as I remember who I am. And for as long as the world tries to forget us, men who gave everything, and asked for only a place to belong. This is my place. And I have returned.